The Eastern Front of World War II was not just a battle between two armies, it was a battle against nature itself. Temperatures plunged to -40 degrees Celsius, winds cut through flesh like knives, and snow buried entire battalions alive. This is the story of how soldiers on both sides fought not just each other, but the merciless cold that threatened to freeze them where they stood. It's a story of desperate improvisation, unimaginable suffering, and the lengths human beings will go to simply survive another night. Adolf Hitler famously said before Operation Barbarossa, "We only have to kick in the door, and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." The Germans went to war completely unprepared for Russian frosts, confident they would finish the campaign in short sleeves. They could not have been more wrong. On the other side of the front, the situation wasn't much better. One would think the Soviet army should have been brilliantly prepared for winter, especially after the Finnish War. However, the facts show the opposite. While some Red Army divisions, particularly Siberian units, had excellent winter equipment, the vast majority were poorly prepared. The shortage was particularly acute for warm hats and gloves. A soldier without proper gloves couldn't operate his weapon. A soldier without a proper hat would suffer frostbite within minutes. The quilted cotton pants and jackets, vatniki, that Red Army soldiers received were highly valued by both sides. German soldiers who captured these items considered themselves incredibly fortunate. Meanwhile, Germans arrived with uniforms designed for Western Europe, completely inadequate for the Eastern Front. In these conditions, improvisation became the foundation for survival. The ability to improvise often meant the difference between life and death. A good foxhole is the foundation of survival in war. But on the Eastern Front, even this became an enormous challenge. The ground was frozen solid, sometimes to depths of several meters. Soviet soldiers dug holes only 40 to 50 centimeters deep, covered with tarpaulins. In such shelters, you could only lie down, packed side by side like canned sardines. They slept on one side. Sometimes the frost was so severe it could freeze half of your body. Therefore, one soldier would periodically give the command, "Turn over." Everyone would simultaneously roll to face the other direction. This simple routine saved countless lives. Whenever possible, soldiers fashioned a stove from a bucket. During severe frosts, these improvised heaters saved lives. Such a heat source didn't just warm bodies, it warmed spirits and boosted morale. Soldiers could stick their feet near the stove to dry their boots. Wet footwear in sub-zero temperatures was a death sentence, leading to frostbite and gangrene. The smell from drying Russian felt boots, valenki, was unbearable. But in war, you get used to anything. Some soldiers burned telephone cable to provide light. The rubber coating produced an awful smell and left black soot on their faces. In the morning, soldiers coughed up black tar. One sergeant, seeing his comrade covered in soot, said, "I don't know if you're coming face first or ass first." What did every Wehrmacht soldier dream about? A handshake from the Führer? His wife's warm bed? Number. Each was obsessed with obtaining a Russian sheepskin coat, the poloshubok. This incredibly warm, well-tailored jacket was standard for Soviet Siberian divisions. The Fritzes, as Russians called Germans, obtained these coats by stripping them from killed Soviet soldiers. This grim scavenging became routine. However, not everything could be easily removed. Felt boots couldn't be pulled off frozen dead soldiers. Therefore, one German soldier came up with a ghastly idea. Chop off the dead man's feet, bring them to a warm place to thaw, then remove the boots. He probably wasn't the only one to show such gruesome ingenuity. This was one of the least horrible methods of fighting the frost. The cold was more terrifying than bullets because it was inescapable, relentless, and showed no mercy. Some Germans became so desperate they killed stray dogs and fashioned crude gloves from the skins. Horse hides were turned into jackets. Such clothing was stiff, heavy, and smelled terrible, but it protected against the paralyzing cold. The famous German steel helmet became a refrigerator on your head in severe frost. Soldiers wrapped their heads with whatever they had: scarves, underwear, or Russian foot wraps, portyanki. German soldiers quickly learned the Russian technique of using portyanki, finding them superior to their own socks. The cloth could be unwrapped, dried by fire, and rewrapped. Crucial when changing socks regularly was impossible. Many German soldiers surrounded at Stalingrad never received necessary clothing. Completely cut off from supply, they had to improvise with whatever they could find in the frozen steppe. Wood was scarce on the treeless steppe around Stalingrad. When any village cottage appeared, it was immediately torn apart for shelter materials and fuel. The owners were driven out and left to their fate. Before expulsion, any warm clothing was taken from them. These civilian families had almost no chance of survival, wandering into the frozen steppe. The encircled German 6th Army at Stalingrad faced the ultimate nightmare. They burned furniture, books, even their own equipment for warmth. They wrapped themselves in anything: blankets, curtains, carpets from ruined buildings. As conditions became desperate, soldiers suffered cold stupor. Men would sit down in the snow and refuse to move, staring blankly as hypothermia shut down their brains. Their comrades would try to rouse them, but many were too exhausted to care. It's impossible to estimate how many soldiers died from severe frost. Soldiers were issued special yellow ointment for frostbite, but supplies were insufficient, and it didn't always help. Sometimes fingers swelled so much they barely fit into the trigger guard, rendering soldiers unable to use weapons. Men watched helplessly as fingers turned white, then blue, then black, progressive stages leading to tissue death. Gangrene frequently set in, and the only solution was amputation. Field hospitals were overwhelmed. Surgeons worked around the clock, sawing off frozen fingers, toes, hands, and feet. Piles of amputated limbs outside hospital tents became a horrifying common sight. Prevention was theoretically simple: keep extremities warm and dry, keep moving. But in practice on the front lines, these rules were impossible to follow. Soldiers couldn't always keep feet dry or keep moving when pinned down by enemy fire. Frostbite didn't just affect Germans. Soviet soldiers suffered too, though generally less due to better equipment and winter familiarity. But thousands of Red Army soldiers also lost limbs to the cold. The proud Aryans, marching into battle for Hitler, could not defeat the Russian winter. With amputated limbs and heads wrapped in scavenged Soviet footcloths, they marched into captivity, those lucky enough to survive. The German surrender at Stalingrad in February 1943 marked a turning point. Of approximately 110,000 German soldiers who went into Soviet captivity, only about 6,000 would ever return home. The rest died from starvation, disease, exhaustion, and lingering effects of frostbite. German soldiers wrote desperate letters home. "We are freezing to death. Our rifles won't fire because the bolts are frozen. Men are dying where they stand. God help us." The Eastern Front consumed entire German armies. Winter was responsible for perhaps 30% or more of total casualties. Had there not been such a climate in the East, history might have turned out differently. This statement contains truth, but also serves as a convenient excuse. The winter was brutal, but Germany chose to ignore it, believing the campaign would end before winter arrived. This wasn't bad luck. It was strategic incompetence. Moreover, Soviet soldiers faced the same winter. They too froze and suffered frostbite. Yet they continued fighting, defending their homeland. The difference wasn't the weather. It was motivation, preparation, and the resilience of the Soviet people. Veterans who survived carried scars forever. Not just missing fingers and toes, but psychological trauma. They had nightmares about the cold for the rest of their lives, never able to be truly warm again. Today we must remember the individual soldiers, German and Soviet alike, who suffered in conditions almost beyond human comprehension. They displayed incredible adaptability, but also experienced the horror of war that forces men to such extremes. If there is a lesson, it is this. War is about human suffering on an unimaginable scale. Young men froze to death in shallow holes thousands of miles from home for causes they may not have understood. The frozen hell of the Eastern Front reminds us why war should always be a last resort. When diplomacy fails and armies march, it is ordinary soldiers who suffer most, trying desperately to survive another frozen night. We remember them, German and Soviet, victor and vanquished, all victims of the frozen hell that was the Eastern Front. Never forget.